Hi, community. A big welcome. Thank you so much for pressing play and being here with us today. My name is Kristin Skelton. I'm the founder of Bud Funding, and here we're all about helping you live your best sustainable life. So thank you so much for pressing play, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. That really helps ripple the positive effects of sustainability around the globe. So today we're going to be talking all about when to plant your garden, when to get it up and running outdoors. And I've invited back a special guest with me. I have Kathy Parsons, who has been a passionate advocate for no-dig gardening for more than 25 years and has planted her first urban food forest in 2008. We already did a video on composting and seed saving. So if you want to watch those, definitely click on the links in the description of this video. Kathy, how are you doing today? And thank you so much for joining me again.
I'm doing really well today. We have a little bit of sunshine where I am, but it's still feeling like not spring because the wind is cold.
Yeah, it's sunny out, but the air is still the winter air. Yeah. So,
Definitely.
so let's dive right in. So, do you have any thoughts on what the best month is to plant a garden?
Well, the typical answer you're going to hear to that is May long. That's pretty much what everybody subscribes to in most of Alberta. But I'm going to ask everybody to kind of challenge that thought and think about things a little bit differently because I'm typically eating out of my garden long before May long. In fact, I'm currently harvesting spinach out of my garden despite this nippy weather. It doesn't grow nearly as fast in the cold, but to get some fresh garden greens at this time of year is just amazing. And Mother Nature doesn't rely on a calendar to decide what the weather's going to be, and we shouldn't be relying on a calendar except as a sort of a general guideline. So the big thing about thinking about when you're planting things is that if we wait till May long to plant things that can, take the chillier weather or whatever, we're cutting 4 to 6 weeks off of our growing time. And we already have a really short growing season.
Mhm.
So if you're not planting till May long, you might only be harvesting from your garden for 5 weeks. So, or for 5 months, I mean, where I'm harvesting for 7 months. So, there isn't really a month. I kind of split it into three categories really of when you're planting seeds directly. So the first one is plant as soon, and you'll see this on some of your seed packages, plant as soon as the ground can be worked. So that's typically mid-April. It will depend by zone. So a zone one, you're probably not looking mid-April. You're probably looking more like end of April. Um, but when you start getting into zone three and four, it's typically early to mid-April when you can start to work at least the surface of the soil. And some areas in your yard are going to be, or in your garden, are going to be warmer than other areas, depending on, if you've got some garden space next to a foundation or a fence or something like that, that will warm up sooner than something that's on the north side of your house, for example. Often the north side of my house, I've been eating out of the garden for weeks, and I go poking around seeing if I can get some fiddleheads out of my ferns, and the ground is still rock hard. So there's quite a significant difference depending where in your yard or what other elements are within your garden that you can use to leverage some more warmth. The second thing is plant when the soil has warmed up. So that's sort of mid-April to early May, depending on where you are in the province, and that's when potatoes and peas and sweet peas can go in. So that's when the frost is completely out of the ground. You can take a full-size shovel and shove it right to the full depth of the shovel, and it will go in. So that's typically when I will plant my potatoes, peas, sweet peas, those kinds of things that can handle some frost, but like to have the soil a little bit warmer than some of your other really cool hardy crops like spinach, lettuce, and radish. The third kind of category is kind of when you plant after the risk of frost. We're never really without risk of frost in parts of Alberta, but as little frost as possible. I mean, I've had my potatoes frosted off in June, so it is what it is. But that's for more of your tender kind of plants that you would direct, so like cucumber, squash, beans, watermelon I usually pre-start, zucchini, those kinds of things that just won't tolerate a whole lot of frost. And that is typically your May long or even later in some areas. Some people don't, plant their cukes until the first week or second week of June, just because they have threat of frost in their area. So you have to think about those microclimates within your yard because you can gain some growing time based on that. And one of the things that you can do to help you determine that is over the course of a year or whatever, observe where your sun exposure is and how that changes as the sun gets higher and higher in the sky through um, the season. So in April, it's quite low in the sky, but by the end of June, it's almost directly overhead kind of thing at noon. So there are areas that might remain in shade for the whole season, or there's some areas that will come to be in full sun as time wears on. And then watch for where snow collects because that will show you where your wind patterns are, where things are drifting, where frost lays in the morning. Those are areas you're not going to want to plant things that are tender to frost or whatever. And then there's things like thermal drafts. So as the sun starts to rise in the sky or whatever and starts to heat up the air, there's little very faint drafts that creates as the soil is changing temperature. And it's not really a wind, but you can, feel a little bit of air movement. And the same thing will happen as the sun goes down. And if you watch where those thermal drafts flow, that will help to tell you where frost pockets might be or, that kind of thing. So it might take you a while to figure out what are the best spots to plant when you're planting early. It also matters if you're planting in the ground or you're planting in a raised bed because raised beds will warm up and thaw out faster than the ground will. So you can be planting spinach in your raised bed, say, long before you'd ever plant it in the ground because your ground is still frozen. For those really cool crops, I actually fall plant. So that's lettuce, spinach, radish, carrots, beets, green onions, turnips, those kinds of things. I just sprinkle a few seeds in a couple of patches, all mixed together. They're not in rows, they're not separated. It's all in one grouping, if you will. And when they come up, then your soil is ready to start planting those cool crops. So you can do another succession of those things. So last year, my fall planted spinach came out March 24th, which was a record. That's the earliest it's ever came out. But this year, it came out March 21st. So I'm actually harvesting spinach from my garden now. And most people are like, they don't hardly have their seed box out.
Yeah.
So you can really change how much you can get out of the garden. And I can't wait for those early spring greens. So I get those as soon as they're up. That's when I know I can start planting more.
And in any case, do you start seedlings indoors?
I do. There's many plants that are better for starting indoors. Um, your peppers, tomatoes, those kinds of things. So some of those you need to start quite early. So in January, that's when you want to start your hot peppers, and it's like not your jalapenos or whatever, but like your really super hot peppers. Onions, leeks, a lot of the common herbs like rosemary, thyme, sage. You want to start those all really early because they're very slow growing, and you want them at some kind of production stage when you're able to put them out. Um, Lavender is another one I plant in January. I'll plant pansies in January because they tend to be a bit slow to start, but they can go out quite early. So it's nice to have, even if you just have them in some of your planter pots, it's nice to go out at the beginning of May and you've already got flowers in your planters. And then in February, you'll start things like celery, oregano, parsley, lobelia, strawberries. Rudbeckia is another one that I start in February. There's probably some I'm missing, but then in March and early April, I'll start my tomatoes, my sweet peppers, basil, nasturtiums, zinnia, marigold, snapdragons. You can start your brassicas, which are your cabbage and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower and broccoli. You can start fennel then. and then late March or late April to early March if you're going to pre-start things like cucumbers or corn or squash, your watermelons, that kind of thing, where it's 3 to 4 weeks before you plant them out, because you don't want them to be, they don't transplant well, so you don't want them to get too far along before you put them out, and you can't put those out until there's no risk of frost. So I start those much, much later. And it also you get to clear some things out before you start new pots, because real estate gets to be a bit of a challenge in the house
Yep.
as things start getting bigger.
And I'm just also curious because I've started things indoors before, and I did. I'm not. Maybe it was like some sort of compostable cup that I put them in, but I actually found that I ended up getting mold in mine. Yeah,
Yeah.
do you typically do like maybe a reusable plastic container, or what do you
Yeah,
do?
like I recycle all the pots that you would have got from the greenhouse, or whatever.
Right.
Some things like onions, strawberries. I'm trying to think of what else. I plant in actually right straight into the seedling tray without any pot, so that and then you can break them up as you're transplanting them. Like onions can go out quite early, but so I just kind of let them go, and I keep them trimmed down to 3 or 4 inches until it might be a bit early now, but maybe next week or the week after you could start putting your onions out into the garden. Um, at least in my zone, and then that clears that out, out of the house, so you can start the things that you're going to start in late April and May. And yeah, I've never had much luck with some of those compostable pots. I don't like the peat pellets either. They don't
Yeah.
like restrict roots. I've made the newspaper pots, but they tend to mold as well. So, and I find trying to regulate water in some of those kinds of pots doesn't work very well either. So I have a stack of pots. Some of them are probably 20 years old, and I just keep reusing those. I just, rinse them out when I'm done for the season and let them dry in the sun and then store them away.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. And is there a different time frame in terms of like planting vegetables versus flowers, or is it totally dependent on the flower?
Yeah, it's more dependent on what you're growing, because there's certain flowers that you would not want to, like pansies. They're super tough. If they get snowed on, they don't care. If
Mhm,
they self-seed in your garden, they're up mid to late April, and they'll tolerate the frost and that kind of thing. Poppies, like my poppies are up now. Others that are more tender can't handle it. So it's all dependent on kind of what weather they can handle. And there's fewer cool crop flowers, I would say, than there are vegetables. So most of them are going to be planted, either when the soil is warmer or after the risk of frost.
mhm. And just for everyone, the context, we're in about mid-April now, just so everyone knows in terms of time frame, like what we're referring to when we're saying we're planting things now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So what should I add to my garden soil in the spring? Is there anything special I need to do in order to prepare my garden bed?
Um, well, for me, I'm no-till. So really there isn't any garden preparation. So in the fall, I put a nice thick layer of leaves on wherever it is I'm going to be planting. I don't have like a garden space as such anymore. I'm planting in between trees, or, there's a little bit of space here, or, wherever. So I'll layer that up with leaves. And in the spring, I'll put 2 or 3 inches of compost on top of that and plant right into it. So those leaves act as a mulch for a while, and then once the seedlings are up, I can add actual mulch like straw or more leaves or grass clippings or whatever, and it just keeps the weeds at bay. Really helps to retain moisture, um, and you just kind of have so much less work to do. I guess if you're gonna till, then you're gonna want to till before you um, get your garden planted. And I think that's another reason why people always stick to the May long, because they think they have to till first. And so, they're not going to get, it's sort of in the rotation of embedded practice that is, oh, I'm not going to get the tiller out till May long. And I'm kind of like, yeah, but you're missing 2 months of growing.
Mhm.
So I think that's part of the advantage of things like no-till is there's nothing to prep. You don't even have to have your hose out and worry about watering because there's typically enough water in the soil to sprout seeds. You might have to, water with a can a little bit if you have some hot days, but you don't really have to worry about it. And it's always good to add compost to your garden anytime. Like you can't really add too much compost in most situations. Things like planters, I like to add a little bit of bone meal or kelp and to kind of boost the soil. And the bone meal really helps with root development. So when those little transplants go in there, they just get their roots going right away. And I like to have them start them early enough that like they're ready to start blooming. I don't want them to start blooming at the end of June. I want them to be blooming when I put them out because the season is so short. So once I, kind of boost the soil with a bit of bone meal, a bit of kelp, I don't worry about fertilizing after that. They're good for the season with some compost and some bone meal and some kelp in them.
Mhm.
They just, kind of keep going. And leaves are really kind of the unsung hero in the garden. And we're kind of silly in our society because we rake up all the leaves and put them in the bag and then throw them in the back alley for them to pick them up and take them away. And then we buy in peat, which is not sustainable. And to add organic matter to our soil, when leaves, that's what nature. That's what the drive. The sort of the engine behind nature and all the things that we see in the forest and the fields and everything else is leaves. So those you never save enough leaves or put too many leaves in your garden, and that provides organic matter. It provides habitat for soil biota. It provides food for soil biota, which is what really drives healthy soil, is the biota. So save those leaves, put them in the way they are, chop them up with a lawnmower, throw them in a pile and let them, sort of decay on their own, and that's what you call leaf mold. It's garden gold. It's the best fertilizer on the planet, and it's free. Can't beat that.
Yeah,
So
of course.
compost, compost, compost.
And I heard you mention the different zones. Um, are you able to share the zones for maybe Canada and the US? Do you have those off the top of your head?
I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know that they are not the same system. So if
Oh,
you see that a plant is hardy to zone 4 in the US, that's zone 5 here. So there is zone, you have to add a zone for, or whatever, I guess if it's 5, we're a zone higher when it comes to hardiness. So you have to make sure that the instructions that you're on either a plant you've bought or seeds that you're growing or whatever, that it has to be a one higher zone here in order for that plant to survive
got it.
or when you might plant it. So, we're typically here, we're zone 1A to zone 4B, I think, in Alberta. And I'm not sure about the US ones, but there's lots of information online and you can figure out where you are. Um, the Red Deer zone where I am is one of the shortest numbers of growing season in the whole province, believe it or not.
Wow.
But I'm right in the city, so I'm in a bit of a heat sink. So I'm a 4A to a 4B, depending on where I plant in my yard. But most of Alberta is probably a 3A. You get closer to the mountains where you are, you might be a 2B to a 3A, depending on where you plant.
Hmm. And Kathy, do you have any other tips about how to start a garden outside that you wanted to share?
One of the things that we haven't really talked about is the idea of, so I'm planting early and I'm harvesting now, or within a few weeks I'll be harvesting radish and carrots and beet greens and things, and trying to keep that going. So succession planting also becomes a big thing when you're planting early. So when my first crop from planting in the fall, when it pops up, within 2 weeks, I'll plant another succession of those same plants. And there's a couple of different ways that you can plant do succession planting. So if you normally plant, 15 feet of beets or something, then to begin with, you could plant, say 3 or 4 feet of it, and then 2 weeks later, plant another 3 or 4 feet and do it like that. Or you can plant them all or the whole row, and then, excuse me, you would pick the very early ones. Like I love baby beet greens in my salad. So they don't even have, they've got a root. They don't have a beet on the end. I'm picking those for my salad greens early in the spring. And then you'll get them so that they have just a little bit of a beet on the end of it. And I love to saute those and eat them like whole with the root and the leaf all together. And then you'll get them so that they're pickling size. So you can pick those. But while you're picking those things, once you've emptied out a space from the size that you want, fill it back in with more beets. And then you'll have more baby greens coming, and you kind of have a succession of a variety of sizes of whether it's beets, carrots, whatever. I do the same thing with my peas. I will succession plant those, and I can be eating peas from the end of May until a killing frost in October.
And
And
do you find there's a different taste in terms of like early harvest is maybe sweeter or not as sweet as mid harvest, or it doesn't matter? All the vegetables taste the same.
there can be some differences in some of your leafy greens, for example, because a lot of them will be a bit more bitter if there's heat.
Mhm.
And I don't really notice so much with carrots. It always seems like the spring, the earlier ones are just really good, but I think that's just because you're so, you haven't had a garden fresh
Yeah.
pea since October. So I haven't really noticed a ton. Spinach, maybe a little bit. It gets a little bit more flavorful until it gets hot. And then it just kind of, it gets harder to grow spinach after the end of June unless you've got a really nice shady spot because it puts out two leaves and then bolts. But if you're succession planting, you can usually beat that and maybe not have enough to have a nice big, saute of spinach, but enough to have some fresh spinach leaves that you would add to your other salad mixes. So, and I always have, the ultimate goal also is to have something that's big enough for you to be able to store as far as your root vegetables go, for over winter and stuff. So if you succession plant, you can have them at the various stages of size, because like who doesn't love baby carrots, right?
Mhm.
So I want to be able to not just eat those in May, I want to be able to eat those all the way to October. And then maybe even bring some inside so I can have some, for Christmas dinner or whatever. So succession planting is a big part of how you can really increase production in your garden and not use any more space. You can use the space where you plan to plant tomatoes. You can get 2 or 3 successions of leafy greens out of that spot before it's warm enough for you to put tomatoes out. So you haven't increased your garden size, you're just using your space better.
Mhm. That's a really good tip, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't think of.
Yeah, it's just sort of, and then they just plant their 50 feet of peas, and when they're gone, they're gone. Well, I don't like to garden that way. I'm greedy. I want fresh peas all year.
Don't we all? Don't we
Yeah. And I guess my mantra is always like plant early, plant often. And that kind of gets you through the basic premise of how that whole thing works with being able to plant some things early and plant them often. So you've always got baby salad greens are coming pretty much all year round, or not all season round, not all year round. And then don't wait till for May long to plant. Like get out there and get things like now. You could
Mhm.
be planting the cool crops now.
Yeah, that is, if you don't take anything else away from this video, take that one thing away.
Get in the garden and plant.
Get in the garden, exactly. Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with me and with the community. I always learn so much every time you join. And what do you think we should talk about next time?
I think we should talk about soil and,
Soil.
and building soil and what makes good soil. Because a lot of gardens I see, they got dirt. They don't have soil.
Yeah. Yeah. So stay tuned for that video. And of course, if you have any questions for me or Kathy, please put them in the comments and we'll get back to you. And yeah, thank you so much for being part of the community. Kathy, thank you again. And I will see everyone next week. Thank you for subscribing, sharing, and liking this video because that really helps ripple the positive effects of sustainability around the globe. Thank you, and I will see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Kathy.